Pini Henarei, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, te māngare o te whare o tira, tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā koe. It's a long-held custom by my people, Mr. Speaker, by the Māori people, that when you're young, when mum gives birth, you take the placenta and you bury the placenta into the ground. And so it's, as a linguist of te reo Māori, the word whenua actually means placenta. And what we're talking about here is land and environment. So the long-held association Māori have with the land, with our whenua, is important. And it's important that we protect that moving forward. I want to acknowledge too the beginning of Mr. Flavel's contribution to this bill, Mr. Speaker, because he also set out what I'd describe as a whakapapa, or a genealogy of Māori and their association with the environment and the land. So I just wanted to make that point here. Whenua, land, whenua, placenta. We are forever locked into the land. I also want to raise two other expressions, Mr. Speaker. Toi tū te whenua and toi tū te tangata. And what that means, Mr. Speaker, is I want to relate it to the economics as well as the environment. And this is, I think, central in the theme of this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. I actually took quite great joy sitting here listening to Mr. Dunn's contribution on this bill. I thought it was well considered. I remember as a young person hearing about the RMA, I would have all been about 10, I think it was, when Mr. Dunn set out on this bold piece of legislation. But even at that age, I remember hearing about the RMA. And I enjoyed his journey that he took us on to bring us to this point. And it reminds me, Mr. Speaker, of the campaign of the government in 2014, where they had this waka all rowing in one direction. Well, what's clear in the contributions on this bill to date, Mr. Speaker, is it appears that one of the rowers has jumped out of the boat and one of the other rowers has actually been thrown out of the boat. And I think that's a great, I think Mr. Dunn's contribution really highlighted the flaw in the process that we've come to right now at this point in time with regard to this bill, Mr. Speaker. The RMA 1991, it was a bold piece of legislation, and now here we are, after all year, the Labour Party putting out the olive branch to the Minister and to the government to work together not only with regard to the RMA, but on opportunities and ways perhaps we could solve the housing crisis. Because there is still a housing crisis, and I suspect that even as this bill passes through, there will still be a housing crisis. I've said it many times in this House, Mr. Speaker, the biggest job my staff have in Tāmaki Makaurau are housing issues. And it's not just about state housing. It's about the working poor. It's about our families who can't even get into the housing market. And that's a significant issue. As this bill progresses forward, I suspect that we will still have a housing crisis. I want to, at this point in time, Mr. Speaker, acknowledge the hard work by the member for Te Atatū, Phil Twyford. He has kept his foot on the throat of this government with regard to the housing crisis. It includes the RMA. It includes economics. It includes the Auckland City Council. It includes all of New Zealand who are keen to see housing affordability for our people. People who are keen to enter into the housing market. Now, I'm talking about housing. Why? Because this particular bill is offered up to the people of New Zealand to solve housing, to provide better economic opportunities, and thus more jobs for our people. As I flick through briefly the many, many pages that have been presented in such a short time, as described by Mr. O'Rourke, I can't see how that's going to happen. It's not clear and it's not obvious to everybody. I want to pick up the point by the member Marama Fox, and when she talked about the RMA, and I'd like to think it's real Māori advocacy, because while I congratulate that it will encourage and it will enable and empower iwi to be involved at the forefront of the planning, and that's what this will offer to our people, we will be diligently and with a microscope making sure that that is actually what happens. And I think everybody in the House will look really hard at this to make sure that tangata whenua, as I described at the beginning of my contribution, still have an important part to play. And that must be protected. I'm a big advocate of that. One concern, however, Mr. Speaker, that I do have is that this government, in their, let's say, bulldozer type manner, in settling treaty claims and treaty issues, in particular in Tāmaki Makaurau, Mr. Speaker, I think in their rush to do that, they've redefined what iwi means. And you'll find, perhaps in Tāmaki Makaurau, that some, as a result of the settlements, have actually had their rights taken away. And I wonder how that's going to play out as this particular bill moves forward, Mr. Speaker. And are we there advocating for those people to make sure that their voice is heard? Mr. Speaker, it'll go through to the select committee process. And I can guarantee you that we will be looking really hard at this particular bill. We've talked about it for a long time. We've offered to assist the Minister and this government in developing the RMA, and we have done for a long time. And now, as described by Mr. O'Rourke, we've come to this very short process where we are actually able to pour through the detail. And in absence of that opportunity, we will most certainly be scrutinising the progression of this bill wherever it may go. The hope is that if it does go through to the select committee stage, Mr. Speaker, we will be encouraging submissions from right across the board. We will be encouraging submissions from whānau, from iwi, from hapu, from concerned citizens, and because there are many concerned citizens with the approach of this government and this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. So we will be encouraging that. If it gets through to the select committee stage, we will also be making sure that our voices will be heard to keep this government accountable, to make sure that the things that are offered by the speeches and contributions already given in the House actually do happen, that there are more houses, that there are actually more jobs, that the economy does do better, that housing affordability is there for our people, and also that the process is made a lot streamlined, it's made a lot more efficient. I think we'll all agree with that. If you can make the consent process a bit more efficient, I think everybody will agree that that's a good thing. But we've got to make sure that you don't cut corners. We've got to make sure that everybody's heard and that everybody has a say on such an important issue. And that is important, and we've got to make sure that that's what happens. And we will be keeping a keen eye on it. I want to finish, Mr. Speaker, by once again congratulating Phil Twyford. Phil Twyford, in his staunch advocacy for this particular issue around housing, for the hard work that he's done, and also to the members on this side of the House, who I'm sure will be keeping a keen eye on this bill. Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.
Kia ora.